All right, so long story short, the reason I dropped out of college is because I became a pothead. All right, I'm joking. Obviously, I have a little bit more to say on the topic than just that. But before I get into any of that, I do want to say that I'm actually a bit of a weed advocate in the sense that I do actually think the world would be a better place if it was more socially acceptable for people to smoke instead of it being more socially acceptable for people to drink. And I think the science kind of backs that up, at least a little bit. And even beyond that, anecdotally, I've seen people in my own life benefit from smoking. I've watched friends cope with some of the harsher realities of life by turning to weed. I've literally watched them change their perspective on a person or a situation and watch that change in perspective lead to a more fruitful outcome just because they decided to come home, take a load off, light up a joint, and think about their situation. Now, I'm not saying that only happened because they smoked, only that the smoking didn't inhibit that perspective change from occurring in the first place. I've also watched friends who are typically very tense and anxious be able to loosen up and project the person that they actually see themselves as more accurately after they smoked. I've seen friends let their guard down and actually confront and discuss some of their more emotional experiences. Friends who usually have their walls up and don't typically let people in all of a sudden become very open books and are willing to discuss and share things that they would usually keep tight to their chest. And at least on a few occasions, I've had conversations with them after the fact, and they've told me how just the process of talking about those experiences that they typically wouldn't share helped to alleviate at least a little bit of the stress that they were feeling at the time. And I've had lots of discussions about these types of things with my friends. And so yeah, ultimately I have to say that I'm a bit of a weed advocate. Outside of the numerous studies that have been done about the positive aspects of marijuana, I've seen firsthand how it can actually be used as a tool to help people with fewer side effects than some of the other tools that we indulge in. But despite all that, the unfortunate reality is that not everything is for everyone. And after over a decade of dealing with my psychological addiction to it, I feel like I can finally say with conviction that marijuana just isn't for me. Unfortunately for me, when I would smoke, there wasn't a lot of perspective changing or opening up about situations and experiences that I've had in the past in order to alleviate some of the stress that I was dealing with at the time. Nope, for me, weed just exacerbated some of my more negative qualities and allowed me to overindulge in simple, fleeting pleasures. There's nothing inherently wrong with playing video games or watching TV, but when that becomes all you do and all you want to do, then there's a problem. And that's what happened to me. On top of that, I was always pretty lazy and unmotivated, especially when it came to school. The only thing I really cared about were sports. I also didn't really have any idea what I wanted to do with my life, and so I really didn't have any ambition, and I had a tendency to just stay in my comfort zone. And so marijuana just exacerbated all of that. I became extremely lazy, content, and I had zero ambition. But despite all of that, I still wouldn't say that that was the worst thing or the most damaging thing that weed did to me. I'd say the most damaging thing that happened to me because I started smoking so much weed was that I lost the ability to engage and connect with people. I talked about this before in some of my other videos, but I used to love being around people to the point where I would have classified that as my addiction. I mean, I loved being around people so much that it was almost unhealthy. I think I already told this story in one of my other videos, but I remember at one point in my first year, I just got back to my dorm room and I was facing an afternoon of just nothing. I think most of my friends were in class or doing one of their club activities, but I just remember feeling so anxious. And so I started pacing up and down my room with my phone in my hand, just praying for someone to text me so that I could leave my room and go hang out with somebody and just not have to be alone with my own thoughts. I mean, in my first year, I was just always in a group of people. And of course, at the time, I didn't see anything wrong with it. But now that I look back, I just remember that feeling of anxiety and how, yeah, that also wasn't healthy. But that's just indicative of how much I wanted to be around people at all times. But whenever I'd smoke, it would be the complete opposite. I just wouldn't be able to talk to people. I just get so self-conscious and anxious and just deep in my own thoughts. And I would just feel like I was on a completely different plane of existence than everybody else, to the point where just everything that came out of my mouth just felt unnatural and I didn't even feel like I was the one saying it. And what made it worse was that all of my friends who were smoking didn't seem to experience this at all. And so they just kept being their funny, charming, charismatic selves. And so I started to develop this inferiority complex on top of this anxiety and self-consciousness. And so eventually I just became silent. I stopped trying to talk to people because it felt like every time I tried, I would end up saying the wrong thing. And I just retreated into my comfort zone. Because of this inability to connect with people on just a basic human level, I had a choice. I could either refrain from smoking weed or I could refrain from talking to people. And I chose the latter. I basically isolated more and more. And despite most of my very good friends coming and trying to get me back to my old self, I kept choosing weed in isolation. And so I stopped going to parties, I stopped hanging out with my friends, I stopped going to class, everything, until I eventually dropped out. Now, the first time I dropped out, it wasn't actually because I got kicked out of school. I had gone home for a break and my parents noticed that something was way off. I had lost a bunch of weight, I was a completely different person, and they figured that if they sent me back to school, then something very bad would happen. And so basically I just suspended my attendance until I was ready to come back. And eventually I did. And I did so thinking that, okay, now I know what the problem is and I know how to avoid these pitfalls. And so I came back with the intention to not let this happen again. But guess what? It happened again. The exact same thing. I started smoking, I stopped engaging with people, I retreated into my comfort zone until eventually I dropped out again. And this time for good. And looking back, this is probably how I should have known that this was more of an addiction rather than this one-off mistake that I made. I mean, I went in with a clear goal, and within a couple of months, everything that I said I was going to do had completely fallen apart. And I was right back in the exact same situation that I told myself I was going to avoid and that I took precautions to avoid. But for me, I guess the allure of marijuana just trumped all of that. And basically for the next 10 years, in some way or another, I was dealing with that addiction. And now, fortunately, in April, it'll be a year since I last smoked. And in that time, a lot of my other qualities came back. I do have a pretty firm idea of what I want to do with my life. And obviously, I want this to be a huge part of it. And so at least to some degree, I have a little bit of my ambition back, or at least the ambition to find what my ambition is. I mean, I still enjoy being in my comfort zone because by definition, that's what a comfort zone is, somewhere you enjoy being. But I am much more willing to step out of it, especially if I can see a purpose in doing so. I mean, to be honest, sharing all of this isn't really comfortable, but I do think it's good for me, so I'm gonna keep doing it. And I wouldn't say I've conquered my laziness. That's always been a part of me, and it's a problem. But I'm definitely less lazy now than I was when I was smoking weed every day. But the reason I said my inability to connect with people was the most damaging thing that weed did to me was because that ability hasn't come back. Unfortunately, the cumulative experience of doing or saying the wrong thing in a group of people and having those feelings of inferiority have largely left me just afraid of social situations entirely. And as I've talked about numerous times before in my videos, I now experience a crippling social anxiety. I mean, a couple of years ago, I reunited with some of my high school friends that I hadn't seen in a very long time. And after, we all made plans to continue hanging out. And I remember being so afraid of actually having to hang out with them. I mean, sure, we can do the pleasantries. Hey, long time no see. How have you been? What have you been up to? That's fine. But anything beyond that, and I have nothing. And so I remember after we made plans, I just got in my car and drove home and just made up some excuse as to why I didn't come through. Just the thought of one of those experiences where I'd said or done the wrong thing in a group of people and having those people shun me from the group because of it. Just the thought of that happening with my old high school friends sent me into a panic and physically made me incapable of going to hang out with them. And so yeah, I just went home. But anyway, so now I place a huge emphasis on trying to regain this ability to just engage and connect with people. Obviously, I'm trying to do it in a healthy way so I don't actually become addicted to being around people like I was before. But still, right now, where I'm at is not a very healthy or sustainable place to be in terms of how I relate to other people. I mean, anytime I have to engage in any type of social interaction, it feels like there's this mountain within myself that I have to climb just to get myself to be able to say what's up. And just for me, in terms of what I want to do in my life and what I want to accomplish, I'll never achieve my goals or get where I'm going if I'm afraid of talking to people. I mean, not too long ago, I had a conversation with a family member and I asked them if survival wasn't an issue, like if you could just do whatever it was you wanted to do every day, what would that be? And they told me that they would just love to be involved in the process of storytelling in whatever capacity, whether it's writing the story or editing the story or telling the story, it doesn't matter. In whatever capacity they want to be engaged in the process of storytelling. But after they answered, they flipped the question back to me. And I said that I just want to talk to people. I wish I could travel the world and just talk to people one-on-one. I want people to tell me their stories and I want to be able to tell them mine. I want to know who people are and why they are the way that they are. And I think that by sharing our perspectives, we could start to uncover some of the objective truths about everything. And so I just want to talk to people in whatever capacity. I just want to talk to people. And I say that knowing how I feel about talking to people right now, about how terrifying that experience is for me. But that's still what I want to do. And since for whatever reason, smoking weed makes me absolutely incapable of doing that, I just gotta stop. And so, yeah, after over a decade of dealing with this addiction, that's kind of where I've landed in terms of my relationship with weed. Again, I still advocate for its use, and I didn't even mention this, but I've had some of my most profound experiences while I was high. But unfortunately for me, that doesn't change the fact that it completely inhibits my ability to do what I want to do with my life. And so it's just gotta stop. But yeah, anyway, that's gonna be it for this one. Honestly, I didn't even want to talk about this yet. I've kind of teased it in some of my other videos, you know, where I talked about addiction and some of my other vices. I always said I was going to make this video about the main culprit behind why I dropped out and why everything went south for me over a decade ago. But there was always something else that I wanted to talk about, so I just never really got around to it. And today, again, I had something else that I wanted to talk about, but I couldn't really talk about that without referencing this period of my life. And so I figured if I wanted to talk about that, I'll have to address this first. And so that's why I made this now. And you know, thanks to my trash short-term memory, again, probably thanks to 10 years of smoking way too much weed, I'm probably gonna forget what that other topic was and never even get around to making a video about it. But I guess we'll just have to wait and see. In any case, thank you so much for watching and for indulging me. I really, really appreciate it. As I said, making videos is gonna be a part of my future in some capacity. And so I really, really appreciate you watching. But with that said, I wish you all the very best going forward. Take care of yourself, and I will see you in the next one. Peace.